Hello, this is Jed Morgan and welcome to the fifth WebEx in our series for installation and configuration of the IQ-PBX system. And on this WebEx we're going to be dealing with trunks. We've dealt with extensions and phone provisioning, etc. And now we'll set up the trunks ready for our outbound inbound routes. So over to the menu, the trunks heading in the menu screen opens up and it advises of what modules we've got installed into the system. If the module's not installed in the system, it won't be visible here. So this indicates what modules and cards we have actually got in the system. The GSM gateways, it does indicate that there are non-detected, so it advises you of that. Voip trunks are the trunks we use for SIP creation. This is the one we use for registration with username and password and account details, etc. And service provider, where we can add service provider trunks, this is where we use the registration for the providers such as Gamma, who require an IP address for registration, no username, no account details, etc. So just with IP registration. And also service provider is where we create the trunks when we network systems together via SIP trunks. So service provider provides the networking, and also SIP trunk provider trunks that don't require username, password for registration. Okay, so that's the different types of trunks we can have. We can also have on the 2000 system an E1T1 primary rate connection that's already built into the system with 30 channels open, no licensing. So on the E1T1 connection. So we'll look at our trunks we have got connected onto the system, and to see what we have got connected onto the system, if we go over to the menu bar on the left hand side and we check line status, here we are indicated what we have got connected into the system. And on our BRI module here, there are two circuits on each module, so we're showing one as connected and one disconnected. So this means we've got one circuit of ISDN2. On here we've got Gamma with SIP trunk registered, and we have VoiceFlex for its waiting for authentication, attempted registration, where we need to tweak a setting or so to get them working. So set up VoiceFlex, Voip Trunk, Service Provider Trunk, Basic Rate Trunk, and our analog trunk is disconnected at the moment. It's not showing any voltage from a line, so it shows us disconnected. Back into the trunks. First one we'll look at configuration of is the basic rate trunks. We've got that installed in our system, and here is where we set the parameters for the protocols within the basic rate ISDN2 trunk itself. Realistically, in default, we shouldn't need to change anything with standard British basic rate protocols, because it should be set up for Euro ISDN, BRI CPE. So this is point to point, set for point to point. We can change the setting for point to multi-point. For network, we can have a BRI and use it as a network trunk to network a system, and we can use the same network point to multi-point, beg your pardon, point to multi-point. So basically we shouldn't really need to change it from CPE. For if we had a primary rate circuit installed, an E1T1 circuit, this is a similar box where we'd change the PRI protocols. And if you're wondering what each of the headings mean, if you hover over the instructional informational icon, then an explanation of that parameters there for you. So if you need to make changes with PRI, for example, if you're QSIG, you want it to QSIG, or want to change the protocol, the signaling, then you look at changing the settings in this box for the E1T1 circuit. But we're looking at the basic rate circuit here, and basically we'll leave it as default, except for this option here. Ensure that echo cancellation is on. Codec is ALAW, and caller ID prefix, this is where we insert our trunk access code and a 00 for international prefix. National prefix is 90. We can put 90 in. It will put the leading 0 in on the display on the number coming in or going out. And private, we can set it the same. Unknown prefix, we can set the same. And local, we can set the same. As long as it's got a 90 in these options for the basic rate circuit, it's good to go. Global DoD, in this box here, if we type in our main bearer number for a 1161, and this is a global DoD, any extension making an outbound call on the system will send these digits to network. Will send those digits to network, providing you own the number or a DDI number, or whichever number in that box you have to own or the customer has to have ownership of. The other option here in this DoD box is where we can type in a DDI number belonging to a range or this customer. For example, and we can drop this box down and associate it with an extension. Add the DoD so that every time extension 204 makes an outbound call, it sends those digits to network. It sends its DDI number to network. Or that can be any number. It can be an 08, a non-geographical number, 0845 number, etc., providing it's owned by the customer, and the provider supports that pass-through. The provider has to support a non-geo pass-through. Okay, or you can remove it from the options. Save the details once they're all stored. Save the details, apply the changes, and that's BRI setup. Analog trunk setup. Deal with analog trunk setup here. We have different options in the UK for our analog trunks as they do in China, which is the country of origin for the system, and we're able to change parameters and requirements for the analog trunks in here, where we edit in the setup here. I do have a document which I'll come on to a little later on to do with the analog trunk setup, and basically we found there are three main settings in the UK for our analog trunks depending on what we've asked for from the provider. We may be running a hotel where we want polarity reversal on hang up, so we can charge for billing, etc., and also reverse signal to hang up the phone when it receives a disconnect from the other end. So we have different parameters that we can set within the analog trunks, and if you program one setting on the analog trunk it doesn't work, then try the second one and then try the third one, and once you find the working set of protocols for you, that's it, you leave it set. Also, we found an issue, just a bit of troubleshooting while we're here, we found an issue on some analog trunks where the call hangs up after 180 seconds approximately, and also if there's a delayed ringing, if somebody calls in on the analog trunk and it rings in the caller's ear for about 10 seconds and then it starts ringing on site at where it's supposed to, it could be because you've got this setting set, you've got caller ID detection set when you've not actually got it activated on the trunk. So set that to no if you've not asked for caller ID, and also set this to no if you find calls are cutting off after 180 seconds in the system. Okay, but there is a document there, and I'll come to that later on, where you can have access to all these documents and technical tips and manuals, etc. Okay, so we'll move on. This is the box where we edit the parameters. We can change the volume setting here. If you hover over the eye, you can look here and see what we can do with the volume. Sometimes the volume may be too low on a particular trunk. You can increase the volume, and I'm not going to go into all these menus, but if you hover over, you can see what they refer to. And this is the box where if the call cuts off after 180 seconds, you need to set this to no. Now what can happen is, a bit of troubleshooting again, is that within certain web browsers this box may disappear. For example, it may happen to me if I log off this screen and go to a different menu, come back to this one, edit. Sometimes the box has disappeared, so all you do is refresh your browser and it will reappear for you. So bit of troubleshooting. If that box has disappeared and you are having a problem, then it'll be your browser. Change your browser or refresh your browser. Okay, analog trunks. We'll look at gamma setup. So we can add, this is for a service provider trunk that does not require a user password and registration account details, etc. Straightforward external IP address registration for a SIP trunk. We create it in here. So all we've got in here is a SIP, type is SIP, provider name would be gamma for example, and gamma's external IP address. You can leave the maximum number of channels at 0, so it will use whatever's available. Transport's UDP, we tend not to change qualify, and the usual default RFC 2833 DTMF mode. Again, global DoD, we can put in a global DoD for the system for any extension that if it dials out on the SIP trunks, gamma SIP trunk, it will send this number to network. And we can also again add our own DDI range to an extension, or DDI to an extension, add it, and it'll populate this box, and that extension will send those digits to network. So straightforward SIP provider setup just with external IP address. Voip Trunk, I'll open our example for a Voip Trunk. This is for registration of SIP trunks that use IP address with a host name or an IP address, a domain. All these account details, including the password, the main phone number, you'll receive from the provider when you purchase your account. Okay, and the same with Gamma. You'll be given details of your account with the registration details, and the same with Voip Trunk. You'll get this information from the provider. They should give you all this information. Now pay attention to online number and caller ID, as these are not always required by certain providers. So on occasions, depending on the provider, as we've got so many different providers now that require so many different protocols or messages in their headers when you initiate a session, that they may require the online number here. It may be the account number, or it may be the phone number without the leading 0. It may be a +44 number, and the caller ID, same thing. If you hover over the informational instructional icon, you'll see what's required in there, or it may not be required. So if your SIP trunks aren't working, it could be because of one of these two settings. You could even put the authorization name in the from user box as well. It may require that. It just depends on what details you get from the provider. Most of these parameters are left in default. We don't change them. Sometimes you may need to enable an outbound proxy server, and you'll be given details of that when you purchase your account with your provider. They give you an outbound proxy server address. Check the enable proxy server, put the details in there, and save everything. Save. Global DoD settings for extension in this case. So we can set a DoD for an extension, assign it and add it, populates the box, save the details, apply the changes. So that's adding a Voip trunk, service provider trunk. GSM trunks, if you have a module installed, you can go in and change it. There's not much to change in the GSM trunk protocols. Just work out of the box, insert the SIM card, use it in inbound outbound routes, as we'll come on to, and you're away. The other thing I want to go through on SIP trunks, SIP trunk settings, and looking at a bit of troubleshooting as to why you can't register and can't make calls. If we go down the menu in the left hand side and click on SIP settings, you need to enable TCP 5060 and 5061, set them to enable. You may receive details of a register timeout from your provider, and this is the timeout you can change. Put in the settings supplied for VoiceFlex 900. It may vary with your provider. You may require stun. If if you use either remote extensions or some service providers need stun enabled, check stun IP address, and it would be port 3478. 3478 would be the port. Okay, that's if you require stun. One of the issues we do have, and this is a fix for it, is that sometimes the system may send its internal IP address out to the network as opposed to the external IP address being expected by the provider. So here we insert, that's the instruction, our external IP address, our fixed external IP address that goes out to the network, and here we insert our internal, our local area IP address range here with a 0/24. Now that covers all the IP address range in the 5 network. 192.168.5. whatever is covered by the /24. NAT mode is set to yes, and allow RTP re-invite. Save the settings and test again, and you should find your SIP trunks registered. So just a bit of troubleshooting on SIP trunks and reasons why we do get registration and don't get registration. There are advanced settings that we can look at, but we don't usually have to change these. I've not had to change any of these for the provider we have at the moment, any of the providers we've tested at the moment. I will say that we do have issues with Gradwell, Tentacall and iHub currently, as they require such different things, and it's sometimes possible that these providers have a lot more than one registration server. For example, Tentacall, they apparently have 60 plus registration servers, and it would mean we have to create an IP address for each of those registration servers in order for us to register every time we dial 9 or access a SIP trunk of theirs. So there are all sorts of permutations and rules and things that the SIP provider requires, and that we may have to tweak and change in the system in order to be compatible with their SIP trunks. But the usual Gamma, VoiceFlex, SIPgate, we don't have any problems with now. We resolved our issues with them. So if you can do, stick to those major ones. But if you have got a SIP provider that's not more commonly known, then we can look to work with the system and the provider to get the SIP trunks working. Okay, we've covered off trunks, setting up, checking, see if they're actually connected in line status, and as I pointed out earlier, there are an awful lot of documents available to download, and including in the 2000 manual are the protocols for the primary rate trunks if you wish to change them or have any need to change them. I will post a HTTP address, a download address, and you can download the relevant documentation. Okay, I'll end that WebEx here, and in the next one we'll deal with inbound and outbound routes. Okay, many thanks. I'll speak to you on the next one.